The town woke before the sun did. Adobe Creek was no more than a scatter of buildings along a slow, mud-brown trickle of water, pressed between a low ridge and a wide, indifferent sky. Most days, it felt less like a town and more like a pause, somewhere the wind stopped to catch its breath before moving on. That morning, the world came up pale and thin, the east just beginning to bleed from slate into a washed-out gold. Frost clung to the scrub and the hitching rails, turned every splinter of wood along the boardwalks into something brittle and sharp. The air had that quiet of very early hours, when even the church bell rope still slept and the noise of life hadn't yet remembered its lines. Down by the livery, a single lamp burned. Cole Mercer moved through its circle of light like a man walking underwater. He forte with slow, deliberate motions, breath showing in faint white puffs. The horses turned their dark eyes toward him as he passed, snorting into the chill. They knew his rhythm by now. Feed, water, a hand along a neck or shoulder, never hurried, never soft enough to invite too much hope. He paused to brace one hand against a stall post, fingers tightening until the knuckles went pale. The ache in his side had started early that day, a deep, grinding pull just under his ribcage where an old bullet had taken up a sort of ghostly residence. Some mornings it just complained. Some mornings it remembered all the miles and bad nights between there and here and made sure he did, too. Cole waited for the worst of it to pass. Eyes closed, head bowed, just enough for the brim of his hat to hide the lines at the corners of his mouth. The lamp crackled. Outside, somewhere along the creek, a lone coyote sang the last of its night's song to the fading stars. He straightened slowly. The mirror nailed crooked to the back wall caught a sliver of him as he turned. A lean face, weather-creased and hollowed around the eyes. The beard kept short, mostly out of habit. Dark hair showing threads of early gray along the temples. There was a scar high on his left cheek, pale against sun-browned skin, thin as a knife's laughter. It tugged when he looked at himself too long, like it still remembered another name. He didn't, not out loud. In Adobe Creek, people knew him as Cole Mercer, a quiet man who'd ridden in 3 years back with a half-dead roan and eyes that watched everything and committed to nothing. He'd asked no questions, answered fewer, took the livery job from old man Haskell the same day, and when Haskell had gone to bones last winter, Cole had just stayed. He fixed things, saddles, wagon wheels, roof shingles, fences. He spoke when spoken to, and rarely more than that. On Sundays, he stood at the back of the church long enough to hear the preacher's voice and see the light through the high windows, then slipped out again before anybody could weave him into their pattern of after-service conversation. He ate most of his meals alone, slept in the small room above the livery, where dust floated like slow snow in the half-light between dusk and dawn. If a man was looking to disappear, Adobe Creek wasn't a bad place to let the world forget him. Cole wasn't fool enough to think it had. He finished with the horses, banked the lamp, and stepped out into the newborn day. The sky over the ridge was rousing itself, streaks of color bleeding along the edge. The town stretched in both directions, a line of squat buildings and false fronts, the saloon's mute windows, the general store sign creaking a protest at some remembered wind. Cole's boots sounded soft in the frozen dirt. He walked toward the pump by the trough, working his shoulder with his free hand to ease away the stiffness. The shot he'd taken some years back hadn't killed him. Some days, he wasn't entirely sure that it had been a kindness. He bent, splashed water on his face, and let the cold bite him fully awake. By the time the sun cleared the far hills, the town had begun the slow, familiar work of becoming itself. Smoke rose from chimneys. Doors opened. The clatter of pots, the distant bray of a mule, a baby's thin cry. Windows caught the first light, turned it into brief, wavering coins of gold before it burned off the frost and moved on. Down by the stage stop, the depot agent shuffled his ledger. 2 ranch hands argued over a busted stirrup. The saloon door sighed as Hank Milner's boy swept out last night's dust and some of last night's sins. It was a morning like any other, until it wasn't. The stage from Red Bluff rolled in around 10, late enough that the driver leaned back in his seat and swore soft, affectionate oaths at the horses for their pace. The coach rattled to a stop in a small storm of dust and complaints. A couple of townsfolk drifted closer, more out of habit than hope. Stages rarely brought anything to Adobe Creek worth remarking on. The doors swung open. A single passenger stepped down. She was young, not a child, not grown all the way into whatever she was going to be. Somewhere in between, with her hair pulled back in a braided knot that had half come loose on the road, and a carpet bag clutched in one hand. She wore a plain traveling dress the color of river stones and a coat too big for her shoulders. The hem was dust-grimed, the cuffs rubbed shiny at the edges from being worried between nervous fingers. Her eyes were what Cole noticed, though he would have told himself later it was the way she looked around. They were a clear, steady hazel, set in a face freckled by some other sun. She took into town with one long sweep, not lingering, not skipping, filing every line and shadow away as if she expected to need them. Cole stood near the trough, a rope coiled in his hand. He watched her the way he watched most things, from just far enough off that he could pretend he wasn't. "Welcome to Adobe Creek," the depot man said, voice trying on cheerfulness like a suit that didn't quite fit. "Family hereabouts, miss?" She shook her head once. "No," she said. Her voice surprised Cole. It was soft, but there was a thread of iron in it. "I'm just looking for someone. Not much of anybody's to find here," the man chuckled. "Name?" The girl hesitated then. "I'll know him when I see him." She turned then, and for the smallest of moments, her gaze snagged on Cole. It passed over him quickly enough. Just one more figure in a town of dust and tired men. But in that brief contact, he felt something cold skitter along the back of his neck. Not recognition. Not yet. Just the sense of a match being struck in a room where he'd thought he'd soaked everything in water. She moved on, following the depot man's gestures toward Mrs. Vance's boarding house. Cole watched her go until the door closed behind her. Then he went back to his work. He wrapped the day around himself like he did every day, small tasks, small rituals. The long, steady rhythm of care given to things that would never ask where he'd been before he came here. He oiled leather. He mended a cracked harness. He replaced a bent nail in the livery's back step that had been catching on the hem of his own pants for a week. By mid-afternoon, the girl had become the sort of murmur that passes through a small town by reflex. Folks at the general store said she'd asked about a room and paid an exact coin. Mrs. Vance said she ate without picking at her food and said thank you without looking down. Hank Milner swore she'd stood outside his saloon for a full minute, eyes on the swinging doors, before walking past with her jaw set like a man heading to the gallows. It was the way she asked questions that caught at people. Not the kind of questions drifters asked about work or land or the price of beans. She asked names. Did they know a man called Jude Maddox? Had they heard of a gang road under the name Red Rock Company? Had Marshall Keating ever passed this way, looking for somebody? By sundown, most of Adobe Creek had decided two things. One, there was more to that girl than the neat coil of her hair and the plainness of her coat. And two, they did not much care for the sound of the name she carried, even if they didn't know why. By sundown, word had reached the livery. Cole heard the names like echoes in a canyon he'd thought he'd climbed out of. He heard them dropped in low, speculative voices from the men watering their stock. He heard Marshall Keating's name and felt the old ache in his side flare, no longer just physical. He kept his hands busy and his face still. "Strange girl," someone said near the trough. "Asking after ghosts." Jude Maddox. Sounded like a made-up name to me. Another man snorted. "What difference does it make? Whoever he is, he's not here." Cole took the bridle from the man's hands and said nothing. That night, the sky was clear and sharp. Stars spilled themselves across the dark like someone had thrown diamonds into deep water. The town quieted by degrees, saloon lights going softer, then out, the last door latching, the last baby finally surrendering to sleep, the last dog giving up its watch in favor of dreams. Cole sat on the edge of his narrow bed in the room above the livery, boots on, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. He turned a small object in his hands, a piece of metal flattened and smoothed by long fingers. Once, it had been the cap of a whiskey bottle from a saloon 2 states and 3 lifetimes away. He turned it over and over. Jude Maddox. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. Not since he'd ridden out of a canyon filled with smoke and broken horses, blood in his lungs, and Keating's bullet in his side, and the sound of a girl screaming for her dead father still snarled somewhere behind his ribs. He'd left that name under the sand, buried with the guns and the bad company and the part of himself that had once believed notoriety and manhood were the same size. Cole Mercer, he reminded himself. You're Cole Mercer now. You fix things. That's all. A board creaked on the stairs. He looked up. The hallway outside his door was a slash of shadow under the lean of the roof. The steps to his room were steep, narrow, known to no one but him. Most folks didn't even realize there was a room above the livery unless he told them. Soft footsteps came up anyway. A shadow paused outside his door. A breath. Then a knock. Soft. 3 taps, as if whoever stood there wasn't entirely certain they meant to. Cole slid the bottle cap into his pocket. Door's open, he said. It swung inward slow. The lamp on his bedside table painted the figure in the doorway in thin, flickering light. It was her. The girl from the stage stood there, coat still on, hat in her hands now. Up close, she looked younger and older all at once. The lines around her mouth spoke way past her years, but there was a stubborn, unspent hope in her eyes that no amount of road dust had managed to choke out yet. Evening, Cole said. He kept his voice mild. It came out rougher than he meant. Mr. Mercer, she said. He felt something in him tense at the way she said his name, like she knew it wasn't the only one. You know it? He asked. I asked, she said. People here like you. He didn't quite know what to do with that. She stepped inside, shut the door behind her. The room shrank in around them, suddenly too small for the two of them and the ghosts they brought. My name's Anna Keating, she said. The world narrowed to a pinpoint and then slowly, reluctantly, opened again. Cole tasted dust in his mouth. Marshall Keating's daughter, he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded once. I was 14 the day you put a bullet through him, she said. The words were flat, practiced, worn smooth by being turned in her mouth too many times. Or that's what the posters say. Cole let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. I put a bullet in the man standing behind him, he said quietly. Felix Crowther. Red Rock 2nd. Your father stepped between us when he didn't need to. Crowther still fell. So, did he? Does it matter, she asked, if he fell in front of or behind you? He didn't have an answer to that would mean anything to her. She took one folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and set it on the small table. It was worn to softness at the edges, creased 100 times. The ink of the wanted poster had faded, but the lines remained clear enough. The jaw, the eyes, younger, harder. Jude Maddox, wanted dead or alive. Cole looked down at his own face. He'd always hated that poster, not for the lie in it, but for the parts that were true. I came to see if it was real, Anna said. If the man who shot my father's killer and got him killed all at once was still breathing easy while he turned into a story on wanted paper. I came to see if the name on that poster was someone I could point to finish something. Her throat bobbed once, but her eyes didn't break. How'd you find me? Cole asked. The last time Marshall Keating's name came up in a telegraph line, she said, it was linked with Jude Maddox. Then the trail went quiet. Too quiet. Like somebody had put him down somewhere and walked away. She shrugged a shoulder, as if the rest were simple arithmetic. Men talk, she said. So do bartenders and stage drivers. I wrote on the words that weren't said as much as the ones that were until they all started pointing here. He didn't ask her how many miles she'd done to get to Adobe Creek. He could see them in the lines at the corners of her eyes, in the way she stood like a person who hadn't had the luxury of sitting down much. What now? He asked. You tell me, she said. I have a letter half written to the Pinkerton office in Red Bluff. I can post it in the morning. I can walk to the telegraph and send your old name out on the wire like a bell. They'll send men. Marshall's men. They'll put you in chains and hang your other name on your neck and make it right. She let the words hang for a moment. Or, she said, quieter now, you can tell me who you are, not who you were, and maybe I decide what to write differently. Cole stared at her. I buried that man, he said. 3 years back. in a dry wash full of sage and mistake. I took what was left of him that was decent and walked here on it. I'm up stalls now. I'm in harness. You don't know what it is to go from banks to buckles, Miss Keating. It's small, and maybe it's what I earned. He met her eyes and didn't let them go. If you want to drag Jude Maddox out of the ground and show him off, he said, that's your right. You bought it with more nights than I care to count. But if you're asking if the man on that paper is who's been waking up in this town every morning, the answer's no. I think about him every day. I work every day to not be him again. That's all I've got to put in front of you. She studied him, really studied, the way a person might look at a photograph of a stranger and then at a man sitting in front of them and try to line one on top of the other. Do you sleep at night? She asked. Some, he said. Some I don't. Do you remember all their faces? She asked. Enough of them, he said. Too many. Not enough. Both. She looked down at the poster, fingers resting on its edge. The neighborhood thinks you're a good man, she said. Helps Widow Sutter fix her porch. Teaches Haskell's boy how to handle a skittish horse. Never raises his voice. There was no accusation in it. No praise either. Just observation. They don't know who you were, she said. They know who I am, he answered. Anna folded the poster carefully, squared the worn edges, and slipped it back into her pocket. I'm staying a few days, she said, to look around, to see which man is heavier on the scales. When I decide, I'll send that letter. You won't get a say after that, Mr. Mercer. Her hand rested lightly on the doorknob. My father used to say a man could die only once, she added, but he could live wrong for 1,000 small days before that. I want to know how you're spending yours. She left without waiting for him to answer. Cole sat for a long time after the door closed, the lamp burning down inch by inch. Somewhere outside, a dog barked and then thought better of it. The wind shifted, a shutter rattled. The night folded itself close again. He slept badly. In the morning, the town looked different, though nothing much had changed. The same dust, the same stores, the same people leaning in familiar doorways or crossing between them with baskets and lists and half-heard conversations. Anna moved through it like a small, determined storm. She went to Widow Sutter's, where she found Cole on his knees by the porch, hammer in hand, patching a board that had splintered under some long-ago weight. She watched him work for a time without announcing herself, eyes narrowed, as if she was counting each strike against some unseen ledger. He noticed her there, nodded once, and went back to his nail. She did not speak. Neither did he. She watched him lead Haskell's boy around the yard with a green-broke pony, voice low, hand steady, not flinching when the animal shied. Watched the way the boy's shoulders unhitched as he sat the saddle, some private terror uncoiling. She watched the way people spoke his name. Not with awe, not with fear, with something more domestic and dangerous. Trust. Word began to seep, slow and thin at first, then thicker, that the girl in the boarding house was asking odd questions of everyone but Cole. That she carried a folded slip of paper like a talisman. That she had the look of somebody who'd slept too close to the edge of grief and might roll back into it at any time. The story started to grow legs of its own. Some say that Cowboy buried his past. Hank Milner told a customer at the bar, jerking his head toward the livery. Changed his name along with his boots. If that girl's right, we might be boarding a wolf in this town and calling him a sheep. By the third day, the sky had a hazy, restless look to it, and the wind had changed direction. Dust lifted in thin sheets, chalking the air. Riders moving along the ridge road showed up as faint smudges against the horizon before fading again. Cole was in the yard behind the livery, checking a wagon wheel with a long, patient touch when he heard the sound. Hoofbeats. For maybe 5 horses. Not the clatter of nervous town mounts. The heavier, synchronized thud of men who'd ridden together a long time and expected the land to make room for them. He straightened, heartbeat stuttering. The riders came into view around the bend a moment later. Their coats were long and trail-filthy. Their hats were tipped low against the wind. They rode like men who liked the feel of being higher than the folks they passed. Cole knew the shape of them long before he knew their faces. Red Rock didn't exist anymore. Not on paper. Not in Keating's reports. But men who'd made a living taking what they didn't build had a way of forming new names around the same bad habit. The lead rider reined in front of the saloon, horse blowing steam. His head turned slow. Jace Harlow, once Red Rock's youngest gun, now older, thicker through the shoulders, but the same hard tilt to his mouth. Scar along his chin that Cole remembered giving him to fight over whether or not to leave a wounded child behind in a burning house in San Angelo. Behind him, 3 other riders. Cole knew 2 by more than sight. Men who had laughed in the orange light of bank fires. Men who had called him Jude and meant it like praise. They dismounted as if the town already belonged to them. Cole's mouth went dry. It didn't take much to tie it together. A girl asking questions about Jude Maddox. The ripple of that name along the telegraph wire. Old gang men who saw a possible payday in the shape of a bounty and a reunion. The past had smelled blood and come sniffing. Cole wiped his hands on his trousers, slow, and stepped around the wagon. He could have gone back inside. Could have walked up the stairs and locked the door and waited to see if the town shrugged and handed him over for $1,000 and the promise of forgetting. Instead, he watched. Harlow and his men pushed into the saloon. Voices rose. Fell. Hank Milner's laugh, nervous, covering something. 10 minutes later, they came back out, and this time they went walking. They headed toward the boarding house. Cole started moving before he had time to think about it. He cut across the yard, behind the church, slipped between the stacked crates behind the general store, and came up along the narrow alley beside Mrs. Vance's place just as the first of the men reached the stairs. Anna stood on the porch, arms folded, chin up. She had the wanted poster in her hand, folded tight enough to crease her knuckles. "You're looking for Maddox," she said. No tremor. Harlow grinned, wolf quick and wide. "Depends who's asking," he drawled. "You a friend or a creditor?" "A Keating," she said. The grin faltered. "Well now," he said. "Ain't that a name I thought we'd left under some other sky?" His hand dropped, casual as you please, to the butt of his gun. Cole stepped out of the alley. "That's far enough, Jace," he said. The men turned as one. For a moment, the street went so quiet that even the wind seemed to lean in. Harlow's eyes narrowed, then widened just a fraction. "I'll be damned," he said. "Thought you were dead, Jude." "Not yet," Cole said. He stood with his hands empty at his sides, body angled just enough that he could see both Harlow and Anna without moving his head. The ache in his side had returned, a hot, steady throb, as if the scar there recognized the people in front of him and didn't care for the reunion. "You've been living soft," Harlow observed. "Stable muck and fence posts. That what they call you now, Cole? Like you're something out of the ground instead of something that set it on fire." Murmurs had begun to gather at the edges of the street. Townsfolk, peering from doorways, pressing into shadows. The preacher stood on the church steps, hat in his hands. Sheriff Dawson, old and weighed down more by years than by gun belt, stepped onto the boardwalk, eyes narrowed. "Neighborhood's watching," Harlow said. "Good. Let him see who they've been feeding and calling neighbor." Anna's gaze slid from Harlow to Cole and back again. "You knew he was here," she said to Harlow. "You came for him. For the bounty." Harlow shrugged. "Bounty bank both," he said. "Pinkerton man in Red Bluff let slip there was a big price on Jude's head in a small town where he'd gone aground. Figured we'd come collect a debt and maybe make a little more on the side. Town's got a payroll coming through tomorrow, doesn't it? Word travels. Easier to get a man like Maddox to do the hard work if you wave the past under his nose and threaten the present." His eyes went cold. "Here's the thing," he said to Cole. "We can turn you in for 1,000 and call it a day. Or you ride with us one more time, help us take that payroll, and we all eat better than we have in years. You say no, and well, shame that. Be a lot of holes in the ground in this neighborhood when we're done. Be a shame if one of them had Keating carved on it twice." Cole felt the world narrow to a point where only 3 things existed. Harlow's hand near his gun, and his fingers tightening around the poster, and the faces of Adobe Creek watching from their safe shadows. He could feel their eyes on him. He knew what they saw, or thought they did. The quiet man who mended their wagons and carried their flour. Or maybe, now, the shadow of something they didn't have a name for, and suddenly weren't sure they wanted one for. This was the line he'd walked for 3 years. This was the knife edge he'd hoped would never cut open. He took a breath that hurt all the way down. "No," he said. "Just that." Harlow blinked. No, he echoed. No, Cole repeated. I'm done riding where other men pay for what I do. I'm done burning what I don't have to live in. You want that payroll, you take it without me. You want my bounty, you'll have to earn it. Harlow's grin came back, but there was nothing amused in it now. Oh, I intend to, he said. His hand flashed. The gun cleared leather with the ease of habit, the weight of years of practice. Cole's body moved before his mind did. Muscle memory answering a call it had hoped was permanently disconnected. He stepped sideways, grabbing Anna's arm and yanking her down and in as the shot spat dust where her head had been a heartbeat before. His own hand found the grip of the pistol he'd sworn he only wore now out of appearance. The gun barked once. Harlow staggered. The bullet took him above the knee, a dirty, meat-tearing hit. He went down hard, cursing. One of his men swung his rifle up. The preacher shouted. The town sucked in one shared breath. Enough! The word came from somewhere to Cole's left, sharp as a thrown stone. Sheriff Dawson stood in the street now, both hands on his own pistol, aimed squarely at the men by Harlow. His face was pale, but his aim didn't shake. This town's had its share of men who thought they owned it, he said. Red Rock, Briggs, whoever else. It's done. You fire again, you won't make it out. Behind him, on the church steps, the preacher leveled an old rifle with more conviction than experience. Along the boardwalk, two ranch hands had stepped out with shotguns. Widow Sutter held a pistol half again too big for her hands, Edward Haskell's boy at her elbow, jaw tight. The neighborhood, it seemed, had chosen a side. One of Harlow's men looked around. Spat. He lowered his rifle. Not worth it, he muttered. The other followed. Slowly. Harlow lay in the dust, panting, hand pressed to his bleeding leg. He glared up at Cole with a hatred that had very little to do with the wound. You think this buys you out? He hissed. You shot your way into hell a long time ago, Jude. You don't get to patch a few fences and pretend you're some kind of saint now. Cole's hand tightened on his gun. I'm not trying to be a saint, he said. Just trying not to be you. He let the barrel tilt downward, then holstered the weapon. Get on your horse, he said to Harlow's men. Take him with you. If I see you on this street again, it ends different. They hesitated, waiting for something in the air to shift, for someone to say they belonged here more than he did. No one did. They got Harlow onto a saddle between them, his curses fading into the clatter of hooves as they rode out the way they'd come, leaving a thin trail of dust and blood behind them. For a time, nobody in Adobe Creek spoke. Then the murmur started. You see that? Jude Maddox. Cole. Shot to save her. Pulled her down. Could have let them take him. Anna stood very still, the wanted poster crushed in her fist. Her hair had come loose from its braid. A strand stuck to the sweat at her temple. She looked at Cole, at the gun in his holster, at the man holding himself upright by what looked like sheer will and a lifetime's worth of regret. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. Is that true? He asked, voice rough. You Jude Maddox? Cole let out a breath. I was, he said. I'm Cole Mercer now. You shot a marshal, someone muttered. I shot a killer, Cole said, eyes on Anna. Marshall stepped into the line. I never wanted him in. But he was chasing me. That's on me. I won't lie about it. He straightened, ignoring the way his side screamed. If you want me in chains, Sheriff, he said, I won't fight you. I'm tired. Just don't let them burn this place down for the pleasure of it. I'll walk. You can write Keating's name in your book and send me where you feel you have to. Dawson looked like a man standing in a river that had just changed course under his feet. Anna, he said slowly. Miss Keating, you came for justice. You saw what you saw. What do you want written? All eyes went to her. She looked down at the crumpled poster, then back up at Cole. My father used to say a man's debt had to be paid, she said quietly. He didn't always mean with a rope. She took a breath. I came here to see if Jude Maddox was still alive, she went on. I thought if he was, I'd have to choose between letting him walk or turning him over. But I've been watching you for 3 days, Mr. Mercer. The man on this paper died somewhere between Red Bluff and this town. I don't know when, but he's dead. The one who dragged me out of a bullet, who fixed that boy's saddle, who stood on this street with men aiming at him and said no to the easy way. He's somebody else. She offered the poster to Dawson. I'll send a letter, she said. but it'll say Jude Maddox died out on the ridge, put in the ground by the people he rode with. No need to send men out this way on a ghost trail. Her hand trembled just a little. That won't bring my father back, she said. Nothing will. But he wouldn't want me to hang a man who'd already done the hard work of burying himself. The sheriff looked at her, at Cole, at the neighborhood gathered around him, eyes wide and shocked, and a little dazed at the way the day had turned. Then that's what I'll write, he said. He spat once in the dust and holstered his gun. Neighborhood was going to need something to talk about, Hank Milner muttered under his breath. Might as well be this. A thin thread of laughter, shaky and uncertain, ran through the crowd and then faded. People drifted back to their doors, to their errands, to their lives, now carrying the knowledge that the man who shoveled their stalls and hammered their nails had once had $1,000 on his head and a marshal's blood on his conscience. Cole felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders and, strangely, lightened something in his chest. Anna stepped closer. You pulled me out of that shot, she said. Didn't have to. Seemed a shame, he said. Girl comes all this way to decide whether to hang a man. Seems she ought to get to finish the job, if that's what she chooses. Her mouth twitched. That supposed to be a joke? She asked. Small one, he said. It's terrible, she answered. He nodded. I'm out of practice. They stood there a moment in the slow settling of dust. You going to stay? She asked. In this town, now that they all know. He looked around. At the livery. At Widow Sutter's crooked porch. At the crooked church spire and the way the light pooled on the creek as it slid past. I came here to bury something, he said. Seems wrong to walk away just when it's finally been laid all the way down. You could come with me, Ennis said. I'm going east some. My aunt's in Red Bluff. There's work. Folks who don't know your face at all, one way or other. He considered it. A clean slate. A town where he was neither Cole nor Jude. Just another stranger. His side throbbed. His hands were nicked and scarred from years of mending. He was tired all the way through. I spent a long time leaving places, he said, riding out with dust in my teeth and somebody else's fire at my back. Feels like maybe it's time I learned to stay put. She nodded, slowly, as if she'd known he'd say that. My father, she said, used to spend a lot of his days walking into other people's trouble. I resented it when I was a girl. Thought it meant he was choosing them over me. I see now he was trying to make the world a place where I didn't have to be as afraid as he was. Her voice went softer. You standing here today felt like that, she said. Doesn't forgive everything, but doesn't nothing either. He met her gaze. If you ever want to come back, he said, surprising himself, there'll be a room over the livery. Might not be much, but it'll be yours a spell. She smiled. Not big, not bright, but real. You fix that crooked stare, and I'll think about it, she said. He watched her go as she turned toward the boarding house, dust snaring around the hem of her skirt. The sun caught in her hair for a moment, made a brief, trembling halo. In the days that followed, Anna Keating posted her letter. She wrote it at a small table by the boarding house window, lips moving as she weighed each word, then walked it to the depot with the steady stride of someone choosing a path they could live with when they lay down at night. She left on the next week's stage, carpet bag in hand, hat pulled low. The neighborhood watched her go from windows and doorways, wondering at what she'd taken with her and what she'd left behind. Cole went back to the livery. He fixed the broken stair. He mended a wheel. He taught Haskell's boy how to listen to a horse's breathing. The sun rose and fell. The creek ran. The wind came down off the ridge with that same old song of things lost and found. Not long after, Sheriff Dawson brought him a piece of paper. Got a telegraph back, he said gruffly. From Red Bluff. Pinkertons. They've closed the file on Jude Maddox. Dead. Body unrecovered. Case marked as settled with Keating's own daughter's statement. He held it out. Reckon you ought to be the one to burn it, he said. Cole took it. The words swam for a moment, then settled. He went out behind the livery, kneeled by the old fire pit he used when the nights got too lonely for just a lamp and his own thoughts. He set the paper there, struck a match, watched his flame caught, curled the edges, turned ink and accusation alike into smoke and ash. He thought, briefly, of that dry wash where he'd buried his guns once, of the way the sand had closed over them like a mercy. He thought of Anna's face in his doorway, flickering lamplight in her eyes. He thought of the people in this town who now knew and stayed anyway. The flame burned out. The wind took what was left. Cole sat back on his heels, feeling the earth solid and unremarkable under his knees. He was still a man with a scar on his side and more mistakes than he cared to count. He was still someone who'd put bullets into men who deserved it, and at least one who hadn't. He was still capable of walking away. But he didn't. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge and spilled a soft, forgiving glow across Adobe Creek, he stood in front of Widow Sutter's new porch with his hammer at his side, watching the sky burn itself down to embers. The preacher walked by, lifted a hand. "Evening, Cole," he said. "Evening," Cole answered. Not Mr. Mercer. Not Maddox. Just Cole. A small thing. A quiet thing. But some lives were rebuilt on less. He climbed the steps, his bad side complaining in the familiar way that almost felt like companionship now. The boards didn't creak under his feet. He'd done good work there. Straight. True. "Soup's on," Widow Sutter called from inside. "Be right there," he said. He turned once more toward the street. Folks moved along it in the last light. Mothers tugging children home. Men tying off their horses for the night. Hank Milner sweeping the saloon's threshold. Sheriff Dawson leaning in his doorway, hat tipped back, watching his town with the wary affection of a man who knew how easily it could fracture and how stubbornly it held. The neighborhood that had been shocked still carried the surprise of it in their eyes some days when they looked at him. But under it, slowly, another layer was forming. Something like acceptance. Something like belief that a man could bury his past and still grow something worth tending above it. Cole lifted his hand in a small, almost shy gesture that might, if he kept practicing it, turn into a wave. No one turned away. He went inside. The night came down, full of stars and the quiet noise of a town that had chosen, in its own modest way, not to let an old story dictate the ending of a new one. Somewhere out on the empty land beyond the ridge, ghosts walked their slow circuits. Men with names like Red Rock and Briggs and Crowther. Men who'd never made it to the part where you set your gun aside and picked up a hammer instead. Cole Mercer lay on his narrow bed over the livery, listening to the horses breathe below, to the distant murmur of the creek. His side ached. His heart did too, but differently now. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, sleep came without bringing the smell of smoke along with it. The cowboy who'd buried his past still lived there, under the skin and the scars and the new name. But for the first time, it felt like maybe he'd planted something, too. Something that might, with enough quiet courage and a little love, take root.